Welcome to Keep the Faith Ministry News. My name is Sabrina Peterson, and I'm filling in for Pastor Mayer while he's on medical leave. The proliferation of retail boutiques in California did not really bother him, Evan told me, but the billboards did. Advertisements for delivery, advertisements promoting the substance for relaxation, for fun, for health. Shop, it's legal. Hello, marijuana. Goodbye, hangover. It's not a trigger, he told me, but it is in your face. When we spoke, he had been sober for a hard-fought 7 weeks. 7 weeks of sleepless nights, intermittent nausea, irritability, trouble focusing, and psychological turmoil. There were upsides, he said, in terms of reduced mental fog, a fatter wallet, and a growing sense of confidence that he could quit. I don't think it's a can as much as a must, he said. Evan, who asked that his full name not be used for fear of professional repercussions, has a self-described cannabis use disorder. If not necessarily because of legalization, but alongside legalization, such problems are becoming more common. The share of adults with one has doubled since the early aughts, as the share of cannabis users who consume it daily or near daily has jumped nearly 50%. All in the context of increasingly permissive cannabis legislation, attitudes, and lower risk perception, as the National Institutes of Health put it. Public health experts worry about the increasingly potent options available and the striking number of constant users. Cannabis is potentially a real public health problem, said Mark A.R. Kleiman, a professor of public policy at New York University. It wasn't obvious to me 25 years ago, when 9% of self-reported cannabis users over the last month reported daily or near daily use. I always was prepared to say, no, it's not a very abusable drug. 9% of anybody will do something stupid. But that number is now something like 40%. They argue that state and local governments are setting up legal regimes without sufficient public health protection, with some even warning that the country is replacing one form of reefer madness with another, careening from treating cannabis as if it were as dangerous as heroin to treating it as if it were as benign as kombucha. But cannabis is not benign, even if it is relatively benign compared with alcohol, opiates, and cigarettes, among other substances. Thousands of Americans are finding their own use problematic in a climate where pot products are getting more potent, more socially acceptable to use, and yet easier to come by. Not that it was particularly hard before. For Keith Humphreys, a professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Stanford University, the most compelling evidence of the deleterious effects comes from users themselves. In large national surveys, about 1 in 10 people who smoke it say they have a lot of problems. They say things like, I have trouble quitting. I think a lot about quitting and I can't do it. I smoked more than I intended to. I neglect responsibilities. There are plenty of people who have problems with it in terms of things like concentration, short-term memory, and motivation, he said. People will say, oh, that's just you fuddy-duddy doctors. Actually, no. It's millions of people who use the drug who say that it causes problems. Users or former users I spoke with described lost jobs, lost marriages, lost houses, lost money, lost time, foreclosures and divorces, weight gain, and mental health problems. The country is in the midst of a volte-face on marijuana. The federal government still classifies cannabis as a Schedule I drug with no accepted medical use. Politicians still argue it is a gateway to the use of things like heroin and cocaine. The country still spends billions of dollars fighting it in a bloody and futile drug war, and still arrests more people for offenses related to cannabis than it does for all violent crimes combined. Yet dozens of states have pushed ahead with legalization for medical or recreational purposes, given that for decades physicians have argued that marijuana's health risks have been overstated and its medical use is overlooked. Activists have stressed prohibition's tremendous fiscal cost and far worse human cost. And researchers have convincingly argued that cannabis is far less dangerous than alcohol. A solid majority of Americans support legalization nowadays. Academics and public health officials, though, have raised the concern that cannabis's real risks have been overlooked or underplayed, perhaps as part of a counter-reaction to federal prohibition, and perhaps because millions and millions of cannabis users have no problems controlling their use. Part of how legalization was sold was with this assumption that there was no harm, in reaction to the message that everyone who has smoked marijuana was going to ruin their whole life, Humphreys told me. It was a point Kleiman agreed with. I do think that not legalization, but the legalization movement does have a lot on its conscience now, he said. The mantra about how this is a harmless, natural, and non-addictive substance, it's now known by everybody, and it's a lie. Thousands of businesses, as well as local governments earning tax money off of sales, are now literally invested in that lie. The liquor companies are salivating, Matt Carnes of Green Wave Advisors told me. They can't wait to come in full force. He added that Big Pharma was targeting the medical market with Wall Street, Silicon Valley, food businesses, and tobacco companies aiming at the recreational market. Evans started off smoking with his friends when they were playing sports or video games, lighting up to chill out after his 9-to-5 as a paralegal at a law office. But that soon became couch lock, and he lost interest in working out, going out, doing anything with his roommates. Then came a lack of motivation and the slow erosion of ambition, and law school moving further out of reach. He started smoking before work and after work. Eventually, he realized it was impossible to get through the day without it. I was smoking anytime I had to do anything boring, and it took a long time before I realized that I wasn't doing anything without getting stoned, he said. His first attempts to reduce his use went miserably, as the consequences on his health and his life piled up. He gained nearly 40 pounds, he said, when he stopped working out and cooking his own food at home. He recognized that he was just barely getting by at work and was continually worried about getting fired. Worse, his friends were unsympathetic to the idea that he was struggling and needed help. You have to try to convince someone that something that is hurting you, he said. Other people who found their use problematic or had managed to quit, none of whom wanted to use their names, described similar struggles and consequences. I was running 2 companies at the time and fitting smoking in between running those companies. Then we sold those companies and I had a whole lot of time on my hands, one other former cannabis user told me. I just started sitting around smoking all the time, and things just came to a halt. I was in terrible shape. I was depressed. Health experts also cited an uncomfortable truth about allowing a vice product to be widely available, loosely regulated, and fully commercialized. Heavy users will make up a huge share of sales, with businesses wanting them to buy more and spend more and use more, despite any health consequences. The reckless way that we are legalizing marijuana so far is mind-boggling from a public health perspective, Kevin Sabet, an Obama administration official and a founder of the nonprofit Smart Approaches to Marijuana, told me. The issue now is that we have lobbyists, special interests, and people whose motivation is to make money that are writing all of these laws and taking control of the conversation. The devil is using whatever means he can to control the minds of people so that they cannot think clearly and come to an understanding of the truth. Pleasure in the form of drugs, such as marijuana, is one way in which he is doing this. This know also that in the last days perilous times shall come, for men shall be lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God. 2 Timothy 3, verses 1 and 4. This is Keep the Faith Ministry News. Thank you for watching.